Well, today I'm playing with another 101. This one is Electrola marked. However, it is made in England, same as the last one. And basically this is the exact machine as the last one I was playing with. About the same age. It's an earlier model, not the earliest model because they were front crank. But this one's probably, let's see, I'm going to say 29. Maybe late 28, somewhere in there. Well, no, it couldn't be 29. It's probably 28. Around there somewhere. There's no tags on these ones. The Electrolas didn't seem to use them. You remember that the last video I did for a 101, which the HMV, it had a white tag right there. This never had that. There's no little holes anywhere in the motorboard indicating it ever had any kind of a tag. Not a lot of difference except for the different water decal, obviously. This one, Electrola, instead of the normal HMV nipper dog that would be there. And on the back of the reproducer, this is an old brass reproducer, by the way. It has German markings, Electrola, Berlin, all the rest. I suspect this, well, the entire machine was made at Hayes, but let's see, anything else about, oh yes, this one also, just like the last one, also has the 410 motor. Let me just lift that out of there and flip it over, you can see it. Don't know about the spring condition yet. Got to open it up and have a look. And of course, sorry about that. Is that going to focus for me? The Gramophone Company Ltd, Great Britain, the same as the last one, Hayes Middlesex. Little spring in this one. Now the last one, I made one of the longer springs. I think the long spring is 12 or 13 feet long. That's made for the late 101s and 102s. The Model 59 motor uses that with a little bit larger spring barrel, and the 102 does also. This one is like, I believe, supposed to be a 9-foot spring, maybe 10. You can use the longer spring in here. It's just not really going to use all of its capacity, that's all. But it'll still give you one good play, you know, easily enough. It'll crank enough for that. They're kind of a pain to get into these little spring barrels because they take up so much room. You can shorten them, but then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of buying the longer spring in the first place and paying extra money for it. So I'm going to hope that this is a good spring in here, usable, and I'm going to retain the new spring for the Model 59 motor, of which I have several needing new springs, and a couple of 102s I'm working on. So I'm really gonna try not to have to put a new spring in this, and if I do, I am going to try to find the smaller spring and add it to my next list of imports from overseas. And of course, this actually has still, the leather is still pretty good on the handle, but as you can see, all the thread's gone. That's okay. I have brand new black handle for this, identical. I will take that handle and preserve it inside the machine somewhere. Easy enough to swap them since I have them in stock. Let's see. I see we're missing a little screw there for some reason. All right, that's not a big deal. I'm sure one of the parts machines will cough that up. I have a few of them for this. Oddball thing in this one. If you take a look, I don't know if I can get close enough to give you a good enough look at this. Look at this needle that was in there. This is a small needle. I'm going to say it's a low-tone needle. But you notice that it seems to have a spring wrapped completely around the back where it would go in the reproducer. Never seen that before. It was in the needle box of this 101, along with several more that are in there. Whoops, let me see if I can focus in on that. A little hard to see in there. There's one or two blued ones in there, blued needles, loud tone needles by the look of them, and even a gold anodized one by the look of it, a gold plated, and a lot of those oddball little needles with the little spring on the back. That can't have been cheap to manufacture, but there you go. There's always something oddball to be found when poking around in the needle boxes because they had endless numbers of needles back then. Really did by the look of things. So why don't we take that and put it back in the needle box before I end up losing it or spilling it on the floor. Other than Everything else looks good in here, actually. I don't anticipate any particular problems with this motor. Looks like it was pretty well cared for. The governor looks good. A little bit of old grease, but not really an excessive amount. We'll get that off of there. You want to get the old grease off. You know, otherwise it starts to turn into sandpaper and it starts destroying your gears. It starts wearing your gears if you leave it on there, even if you put new lube. So get them cleaned up, get them off of there. It's not really that hard to do on a small motor like this especially. But do it on any phonograph motor, you know, not just this one, any of them that you come across. That should be part of the full service. You can see this one does not have a lubrication diagram, and it doesn't look like it ever did. I see no signs that it was ever in there for some reason. Maybe they left it off by accident or didn't put them on the German machines and put them somewhere else. I don't really know. See how easy that comes out? In and out, no problem. That's how you lubricate your motor. You take the 4 screws off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Lift it right out. Oh, I forgot to show you. This also has a dealer tag on it. Let me just move the machine here a little bit. Get that out of the way so you can see it a little better. And you see that? I can't tell. Sometimes the camera sees better than I do. Little dealer tag on there from Germany. Soul. Is that Soul? Yep. That's where it should be. Set right there. Hopefully it is. We'll check that later. And that's pretty much it. Your basic black 101. I managed to acquire a surprising number of these, even though these were never ever sold here in the US market. Not the British version or their German ones or any other HMV. They were brought here by individuals for the most part, to soldiers and travelers and tourists and whatnot, bringing them home, people who might have immigrated here before, during, or after the war. Well, probably not during it. And they were really popular whenever they turned up, because actually Victor did not have anything that competed with this. They had small, cheap, lightweight portables. Yes, they did have those. Not nearly as good as this. And they had some very expensive premium models that were very heavy and bulky, and like the 255 orthophonic, which was out at the time this was made. You know, and things like that. But those were awkward to use. Not to use so much, but to carry around. Very heavy. I mean, the 255 used an all-steel case covered with heavy padding. That's just about bulletproof. It's pretty heavy. The motor was heavier. Everything was heavier. I also used pot metal, which is probably okay back then, but today not as popular with collectors because it tends to crack and split and come apart. And just generally be a pain in the ass to source out if you need to replace it for any reason, which is pretty frequent because it cracks and splits and blisters and everything else. This machine uses no pot metal at all, unless it's one of the later ones that did have pot metal in the reproducer. The number 4, just like Victor did, HMV started making the number 4s out of pot metal. I believe the Germans, Electrola, did later on make their own for like the 106 and all of those. And they used pot metal perfectly fine in 1930. But today, almost a century later, the pot metal is rarely ever in good enough shape to use, because it was such a thin casting to start with. It's now cracked and warped and split, and you end up having to search the world trying to find an all-brass reproducer like is on this one. I think this is only the second time I've ever had an Electrola that had an all-brass number 4 on it, German marked all-brass number 4 on it. More common with my HMV, regular HMV 101s and so on. I've never had a 106 that had it. I don't think they even used them on those. Electrola 106. You know, and obviously the Victor 4s will fit on these. If you ever found an all-brass Victor 4, good luck with that. And they're there, but very expensive and hard to find. Fortunately, however, you can put an Exhibition or a Victrola number 2 on this machine, or any 101, or not the 106 unless you change the back gasket to the orthophonic style. Then you could, but like on the 102. But with these, you're kind of stuck with the Exhibition or the number 2 if you're missing or have a damaged reproducer, which is perfectly fine. They work. They do work. And sound pretty good, too. Only thing you got to watch out for is when you're changing these isolator gaskets on the back. Obviously, this is not the original style that was on there. This is the US replacement, which fits perfectly. It's just a number 4. The brass sleeve in there on the reproducer gasket, not on the tone arm, on the isolator gasket, sometimes needs to be relieved a little bit because it's too tight. If it's too loose, there's ways to deal with that too, but if it's too tight, you do have to sand it down a little bit inside, file it, however you do it. Remove the gasket from the reproducer first, and then just file it down so that it'll slide. I don't know if you want it snug. You don't want any air leaks there. That's a bad place to have an air leak. You want to see a little bit of effort to put it on there, but you want to be able to take it off afterwards. And without it, I mean, if it pulls off the reproducer and you end up with the gasket just on it, that's not the end of the world. You can get it off easily enough, and just reattach it later on, loosen the set screws, and stick them in there. The original HMVs had one of these screws, the one up here actually, went right through the isolator gasket, and it was your pin. It was your guide pin. The replacements do not use those one-piece long straight-through pins. It's just a regular set screw here, and the pin is cast into the brass of the gasket. So you actually have to source, and they do make them new now, you have to source a set screw to replace this up here. And any of the 101s, whether they're made for the German market or not, you have to do that. All right, we'll get started on the service of this in a little bit. Hopefully I do not have to source a spring. If I do, I'll just put this aside until I'm ready to order several. I usually like to order them 4 and 5 at a time and get it done that way. Because I do have more 101s to work on. I can put this aside and move on to the next one. Hopefully has a number 59 motor. I had forgotten I needed 2 of the shorter springs, but actually when I ordered new springs, the shorter versions were not available at the time. They were out of stock. Common problem in these days of shortages and problems and everything else. There you go. First look at this particular Electrola 101. I have had others on my channel before. I own more than one of these. And I probably have more to come.